This presentation is an attempt to gain a dialectical advantage over myself, assuming that dianoia and logos or speech and thinking are the same thing. I don't think they're quite the same thing. I think there's I think existence, Heideggerian existence, has to come in to this question, but allowing that thinking in a way just refers to talking, and talking to oneself is as much dialogical or dialogic as is talking to another. Um, I just heard a talk by, it's online, like EGS talk by Ronell. Not all the European graduate school stuff is bad. A lot of it is pretty good, I think, actually. Agamben has a bunch of talks on that website, which are excellent. And Ronell, the student of Derrida, made this point that somebody, unfortunately I forget exactly who it was, but apparently somebody came out years ago with a statement on whether the Germans can be forgiven for World War II. I don't know the years, unfortunately, but her point was he made one statement saying, like he wrote an essay or an article or something, saying, yes, they can be forgiven, and then after a time, I don't know, 6 months or something, I don't know, I actually don't know the time frame, they came out with another article reversing his own vision, reversing his own position, saying, no, they can't be forgiven. So, I mean, obviously, maybe people came and criticized him and influenced him, but maybe he just had bottom through his own self-dialectic, took up the other side later on. So one can do that. So just extemporaneously, let's try to look at one, I want to set out as much for myself as for any possible participants or people who would leave comments, and then I would respond to them. Let's lay out just a schema. So one, I'd say, in all these questions of physics interpretation, which one way in on this is just look at all the recent videos where Zizek's trying to interview physicists and so-called experts on physics about the problems and trying to self-educate himself on it. Then you'll see the type of stuff that's being thematized by him as a so-called materialist Lacanian or materialist. How does he understand it? As somebody who rereads Hegel somehow and as a materialist, Hegel being the absolute idealist. One, what is an observer? So I'm just making a kind of formula, and then at each point there could be challenges. What is an observer in physics? So there's like a religious demand that in physics we're dealing with direct reality and the data is direct reality. There's a lot of people who feel that viscerally. But we have to look at it like phenomenologically, or put another way. Heidegger gives the formula for phenomenology. He says phenomenology is the thing that has no specific subject matter. It's just a style of research. If you're doing physics, then you have a specific subject matter. So already physics is not history. Physics is not chemistry, and so on. It has a specific subject matter. Phenomenology is makes the boast to have no specific subject matter. We just look. It's just a way of looking. So if we just look, it seems to be that one, there's apparatuses, there's machines that are defined as the observers. So Einstein, for instance, definitely and positively defines the machine as an observer. Heisenberg goes so far to say is what can be measured is reality. What can be measured means by a machine or by an apparatus. But then two, so that's one way of defining observer is the machine or the apparatus. We could analogize it, or in some way it's there's a homology on a ruler or something like that, but we're talking about fined and refined machines that give um, to a high decimal number some kind of a readout after being uh, like perturbed by something very small. Um, so that's one form of defining what an observer is. A second would be to say the observer is refers to the equation. So that then you get the problem that's so topical is whether um, quantum physics, which doesn't have a vector properly, is properly observing. And Einstein, and then my case would be to say the reason Einstein's complaining about physical reality, the so-called what are the conditions for actual physical observation, is what he's saying is this type of equations, they can't possibly observe physical interactions because that's not what they're only set up to give like a well, let's not go into that now. But in any case, the EPR paper is just saying, Schrodinger's equations are simply not set up to observe physical reality by the type of equations. So that's the second thing, is observer in terms of the equation. So the observer in terms of the device, observer in terms of the equation, and then I'd say there's a third one, which is how are we, the human beings, involved in this issue of the device and the equation. And then I think you could, one way to go into it, and I think it's the Oppenheimer version. So I'm thematizing as there's the Einstein version, there's the Schrodinger version, there's the sort of vague, hazy interpretation by Bohr, which doesn't really mean anything, except it has a intellectual content, but it doesn't really mean anything so far as the observation is concerned. It could mean something if on top of the two observers named, there's also this issue of the sort of our hazy intuition about how we should understand it and how we should move forward in making further tweaks to the equations or further tweaks to the observational devices, which include these giant super colliders and other things. But then there's the discussion about, I'm going to call it the Oppenheimer interpretation, which I think is the best and most closest to Heidegger's and opens the door to Heidegger's, which is to do with the saying that so Kant is saying that Kant is mistaken. Kant's version, which basically we could superimpose on Galileo, on Descartes, is wrong. And then Einstein is therefore conservative here. He's trying to say their version must be something like that, must be the definition of physical reality, and the equations as observers must take them into account, something like a vector space, rather than what's going on now, which is more to do with topology and tweaks to the limited data accounts and the Schrodinger stuff. Sort of like you have a two-dimensional version in Schrodinger, and then you try to make tweaks to make it give you more, and then you do things like Bayesian updates, which to me I understand is analogous to the Monty Hall problem, which gave a lot of people a difficulty, just a simple idea of an update, updated information, which is nonetheless statistical, because well, let's not go into that right now, but let's just enumerate. So there's three different versions, and one is I'm calling the conservative Einstein version, two the Schrodinger version, which is no longer deals with physical reality in the sense of a three-dimensional world. Never mind, forget about, don't make like knee-jerk criticisms about, oh, but I thought Einstein talked about space-time or something like that. Forget about that for the moment. We're just talking about either you have a proper vector, which is to say something's has a direction and it's moving at a certain rate, or you don't have enough data to construct the proper vector. So those are the two options. But then there's a third issue in that it's not an issue about the equation. So it's an issue about the interpretation on the whole, which could influence how we change the equations and how we change the machinery, which is to say there is, when we begin, the Kantian notion that everything in the world has to adjust to our experience is thrown out. So Oppenheimer throws that out, and he says instead something more like Piaget. So he says Piaget, who was at Princeton at the institute he was running at, Oppenheimer was running at Princeton, he characterized him as almost a philosopher. So Piaget's looking at the way kids construct, small children construct their view of spatialized reality, and he's saying Kant is wrong because there's something prior to the physical reality in the way Einstein is demanding it be understood in the mentality of small children, which then, according to their cultural situation, gets fixed in a certain way. So going forward on that, so let's just keep that for kind of a orientation on thinking about this, thinking about physics. And then I want to say the problems that Oppenheimer is raising and Piaget is raising, and the dismissal of the Kant's version of phenomena is should be able to give us a corridor of invasion towards Heidegger and Heidegger's criticism of Heisenberg and of Einstein and of Heidegger. A start point there for anybody that wants to go into it would be Heidegger's early speech on Bergson, where he criticizes Bergson, and this is also a criticism of Hegel. So Hegel has kept with this ontic or physicalized version, which we could already construct of what being is, that we could already construct by looking at book 3 of the Physics, of Aristotle's Physics, by seeing this notion of the for motion to exist, there has to be a kind of negation, which consists in a way of the Plato and Socrates notion of the container, as though there were, and I think we could also try to thematize or at least ask whether this is properly superimposed and intelligible as the same thing Galileo's doing when he rejects the notion of the nature abhors the vacuum, and therefore provokes the ire of the Catholics who think that what Galileo is saying is irrational. It is, I think, sensu stricto, the core of the current observers, so far as current observers have to do with inertial frames of reference, and then a deviation from the inertial frame of reference. In Schrodinger, they're on an ancient track which is not phenomenologically in the Heideggerian sense, in the full sense, correct. If we look at what's happening, it's wrong, and then one avenue into that is the this Oppenheimer stuff.